Now, if you've watched the channel in recent weeks or recent videos that have been done in the last few months, you probably would notice one of the furry animals sitting on top of these things. These are Boss micro rack effects. Now, Boss made 13 of these, or 13 different types of effect module, which meant there were 13 boxes that looked like this but did slightly different things. And these were released between 1985 and 1986. And I would probably say that that time period is the transitional period between the analog synths of the 70s and the digital synths of the 90s. And during the 80s we made that kind of transition. So this was right in the middle of the transition. Becomes important a little bit later on in this video. Each unit is roughly 1 U high. What's that there? Which for those of you that don't work in U, that's about 1 3/4 inches. For those of you who don't work in inches, I couldn't tell you what that is straight off the top of my head. In centimetres. And about half a rack wide. So a rack is 19 inches. These are about 9.5 inches wide. Well, these are actually about 8.5 inches because you've got bits on either side. And you could rack these, put these into your rack mount unit, and somewhere around here, down here, these are the official rack mount ears for one of these things. There you go, there's one of those. And what you did was you put that in your rack and you bolted these in like so. There is a piece with a hole there, if you like, where you screw it in, and the screws are actually in the bottom of, it's because I took it out of here. So if you look at the bottom of these, you can see the screw that screws that in there. And then you rack mounted them. That's what you did. Now, you could also, if you had money, and they was quite slick actually at the time, Boss made a rack for these, so you can have 5 of these in a rack. And if I remember, I will put a picture of what a Boss rack looks like. And 5 is an operable number. You'll find out in a sec. What you needed to make these work was you couldn't run them off batteries. There's no way to run them off batteries. So you needed a power supply. The original Boss power supply I don't have. The guy who's lent these to me has a aftermarket power supply, or a pattern part, depending on which way you look at it. But that power supply needs to give out 9 volts, which is what these things accept. It's exactly the same power supply that is used on the Boss pedals. So any of you that got guitar friends and they have pedals in a pedal board, the likelihood is they probably had or have Boss pedals. That's the same power supply to run those if you're not running off batteries, and to be honest, you'd be crackers if you were running them off batteries, but that's personal preference. So you needed one of those to power one of those, and you could daisy chain these. There's an in and an out for the power on the back of one of these things. You could daisy chain these things for up to 5. Funny that, isn't it? Because the Boss rack unit takes 5 of these. See why? So 1 rack unit, 5 of these, 1 power supply per Boss rack. What then becomes interesting is that there were 13 of these. So that doesn't, it doesn't take a genius to work out that that's 3 racks, but not quite. So why they stopped at 13, don't know. But I suspect that the limitations of these, and we'll come on to that in a couple of minutes, probably played into why they didn't go any further. But that's the rack unit. There were 13 of them, as I said. So I'll start with, as I say, I've only got 4 here. I've got those 3 and the one I had in my hand a second ago. But referring to my notes, the 13 units, as I understand them to be, was the Boss RBF10 flanger, the RCE10 digital chorus ensemble, the RCL10 compressor limiter, which I actually have. I thought I had the limiter. That's the limiter. The RC10 digital delay, which I don't have. I have the RDD20 digital delay, the RGE10 graphic equaliser, which is what that one is, the ROD10 overdrive distortion, which is that one, the RPD10 digital panning delay, the RPH10 phaser, the RPQ10 preamp and parametric EQ, the RPS10 digital pitch shifter and delay, which is what that one is, the RRV10 digital reverb, and the RSD10 digital sampler delay. So they were the 13 that were made. And then they stopped. Remember, like, comment, subscribe to the channel. Go over to Instagram and follow me there. Go over to Facebook, follow me there. That's where the normal notices are. And consider becoming a Patreon. So why did they stop? That was a very good question. I don't know why they just made these for 2 years. I suspect they didn't sell as many of them as they thought they were going to sell. And possibly that's because I wonder what the target audience for these were. And I've always wondered what the target audience for these were, because to me, when I look at these, I kind of think they're targeted at a keyboard player. But Boss products typically are the Roland arm that is targeted at the guitar player. And anybody who's in a band, who's played in a band, who knows guitar players, or typically they will have a pedal board in front of them, and that pedal board is likely to contain one or more Boss products. So the guitar pedals for Boss, I think, are just an absolute cash cow. They do exactly what they say on the side of the tin, and they are incredibly robust. I know guitar friends of mine who play guitar and have had Boss pedals in their pedal board for years and years and years. And you've got to remember, what these guys do is they stamp on them when they want to engage the effect, and they stamp on them when they want to stop the effect. We might all like to think that we just press them lightly, but the reality is they don't. So the only thing that tends to go on these pedals after a period of time is there is a reed switch that sits underneath that bit that you stamp on, and that goes occasionally, but that's a really cheap, easy part to replace. So I kind of sit there and think, well, who are the target audience? These are designed to be rack mounted. In any way, shape or form, they're designed to be rack mounted. Right? They're not designed to sit like I've got them sitting over there on top of each other like that. They are designed to be rack mounted. And not on the floor like a traditional Boss pedal might. You can, if you look at most of the backs of these, there is a socket, and there's the socket, this one, that says effect pedal, or effect and remote is what it says. And what that means is you can effectively plug a latching pedal into that, and run that cable and stick it in front of you, and every time you press it, it latches on, and every time you press it again, it latches off. But why would you? If you're a guitar player, why wouldn't you just have the pedal on the floor in front of you? Now, one of the things about this being a rack mounted module is you can have it at waist eye height, I suppose. So as a guitarist, you could sit there and you could twiddle it without having to bend down or kneel down to change the settings on it. That's possibly one of the ideas for it. But that's a lot of faff for somebody on stage, and it's also a lot of faff if you have to run a separate wire and a pedal for every single one of these that you've got in your rack, from the rack to in front of you where you're playing on stage. Doesn't kind of work. So that leads me to say they might have been targeted at guitar players, but really, actually, what I found in the 80s, probably more than 90s for me, was that many of my friends had these units for their keyboards. Now, again, going back to the fact these are meant to be rack mounted, so a keyboard player would typically be standing or sitting with a rack of something or other around him. These quite easily sit into that rack. All of a sudden you've got your effects in a rack. They can sit at waist height, but I always saw the drawback of these things is that if you look at the out back of these, let me just put my notes down for a sec. This is the input and the output, and while it looks like on camera there's 4 sockets there, actually what you have is you have a line level and a signal level input. So line level input, signal level input, line level output, signal level output. So these are all mono, they're not stereo. Bit of a drawback if you run in stereo keyboards. However, stereo keyboards, even though keyboards ran stereo, quite often back in those days, and probably up until quite recently, most venues ran out of sockets on the desk, and therefore a keyboard player turning up with multiple keyboards quite often found himself restricted to a mono feed unless he bought his own mixer. So quite often you were running your keyboard, even though your keyboard was capable of a stereo feed, you were quite often running your keyboard with a left only feed, or in this case it says A and B, an A feed going out of the keyboard, effectively running the keyboards in mono. So therefore you could use one of these effects for a stereo keyboard. But think back a little bit further. A lot of the synthesizers that were coming, that were still in circulation and heavy use at the beginning of the 80s, and even manufactured into the 80s, had mono feeds on them. Again, you didn't need a stereo feed, so these things would work quite well for you. So was mono really a drawback? The answer is probably no, but the reason why I think these units started to die out, or died out very quickly from a keyboard perspective, was the introduction of things like the Alsys range of effects units, where you could effectively have a stereo feed and apply multiple effects to a single source and then process those and send them on. I think that is what killed this style of unit out, because you would pay, let's say these were, I can't remember what they were now, but I think they were about $200 a pop. You got this for $200, $400 you got the Alsys Quadriverb, or whatever, the MIDI verb I think was the first one. But you got one of those. You could do far more with the MIDI verb than you can do with this for a couple of $100s more. That's why I think they failed, but I always would be open to somebody correcting me on that. Now, what I thought we'd do is, because I have this Yamaha DX7 in front of me, and just sitting off camera over there I have Gary's Roland JX3P. The Yamaha DX7, although a very functional synth, has no effects on board. Good synth to try this out with. The JX3P does have the chorus, but that's about all in terms of effects. So, what I thought we'd do is I thought we'd plug a couple of these in. Well, let's plug all 4 of them in and just see what we get out of them. I'm not expecting too much, if I'm brutally honest, but I thought we would just plug them in, since I did promise the owner. And just for reference, the owner, I don't know whether I said it earlier in the video, the owner of these is the drummer of the band, the prog rock band Innovator, who has lent these to me. So I thought what we do is we'd plug them in and see what we get. So I'm not going to start with that one, which I have actually got there. I'm actually going to start with this one, which I think you'll probably get more out of. Boom, 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 boom. And then we need to just work out which wire is which. Off the back of this. So that's the output wire. Go in there. So, and therefore, by logical deduction, the other one must be the input wire. There. So, and it's to be like that. And as I thought, you have to have power. And let's see what we're hearing. Right, so there's a stringy type sound. If I engage the effect now and we give it a little bit of delay, 200 milliseconds of delay. And what I'll do is I'll take it in and out of mix. So that's dry, 50%. So that's 50%, 20 seconds a millisecond, 20 milliseconds. It's very subtle. Apparently that's an inverted delay, which I think is awful. You hear it pitching. Then you get into this bit, which I think is quite interesting, actually as an effect. And I can I can tune, or I can pitch shift. I think that's an interesting effect. I'm not quite sure why I'd use it, apart from if I was trying to do there's a couple of films that have this sort of sound, I suppose. Let's just do. Sounds like something out of a Flash Gordon movie, doesn't it? So that's the pitch shifter and digital delay. Okay, so I've swapped the DX7 for the JX3P. The reason I've done that is because I think the JX3P is probably more suited to an overdrive and a distortion effect than the DX7 is. Now, the DX7 probably could do it as well, but I think there's a number of sounds on here that probably would work rather well. So let's try. That sound. That one works for me. Stock sound. There's no effect in there. That's what it sounds like. I'm going to put the effect in now. Quite a discernible difference there. Right, so what I've done is just reset all the equalisers to 0, and if you go down to this low end and then I might have just had to cut a bit out of the video because I think the overdrive unit is distorting the output. It was going sort of through the roof on the recorder. So let's try again. So I've now mucked around with the frequencies for the equalizer. Still fairly loud. Let's turn it down a bit. Let's try the next overdrive, which is 3. Kind of works better with the low end sounds on this particular. There's something called well, it gives you an idea. So you go from that quite mellow sound to heavily distorted sound. That's kind of what it does. Next. Okay, the next one is the limiter and compressor. And again, I'm not go back to this is a I love this sound. I think this is one of the best sounds on this synth actually. It's called Fat Fifth. And that's without the effect in. Well, that is definitely doing what it's meant to be doing, which is actually compressing the high top of the signal down. well, that is doing what it's meant to be doing. I just don't think it's actually particularly sexy. Now, I suppose with this, what we would be looking for really in reality is to be limiting probably a bass signal, something that's going out of range, and it does it quite well. I have to be honest. It's for a mechanical device. It is doing what it's meant to be doing. I'm just not sure. Trying to overdrive it with this keyboard, it is actually doing what it's meant to be doing. It's not really overdriving. Hey ho! But that's the compressor limiter that came out of the range. And last but not being least, we're on the graphic equalizer. Now I've got the graphic equalizer set at effectively direct pass through. Let's just put the effect in. As you can see, because I've got it set flat, there's nothing happening. But let's try. Okay, you can see it's doing what it's meant to be doing. Let's take the top end out. Bring more bass in. Now that is distorted. Resonance to the top end. Let's set it up as a normal key range would be expected. Flat, EQ'd, flat, EQ'd. Well, it's doing what it says on the side of the tin. Now, what I do like about this is the fact it's got the little LEDs, and I'm not sure that's showing up on camera. Let's try it to the camera overhead. Can you see those LEDs on each one of the faders? Now, there is one fader that's missing the LED, which is like it's kind of like effectively, it's the simplest thing in the world. It's the LED legs are just basically the LEDs put into a cap, and then the legs are just fed into a holder, which I think is quite hilarious. But again, not really getting much out of that. Now, what I will say is, for years I wanted to get hold of the Boss Micro X stuff and see what it did, and as you can see from that very poor demo by me, it is actually quite limited. It kind of does what it says on the side of the tin, but actually in terms of what you get out of it, it's really quite limited, which is a shame. But you've got to remember, again, as I said right at the top of this video, this was 1985, this was 1986, and other players were coming into the market with much more sophisticated effect units that did a lot more. So you got more bang for your buck in effect. So I think these had a place. I think the whole idea was to try and sort of sell to my view is sell to the keyboard player the effects that they've been selling to the guitar players. But there was a degree more sophistication required by the keyboard players. And, you know, even without the effects, you know, this keyboard, I have to put my cans on for this. Sounds much better running just with the chorus. And on that note, I'm going to say live long and prosper, and I'll see you all next time. Bye bye.